Are you ready to turn your best ideas into a thriving online business?
Introducing Shopify, your no excuses business partner. You might not realize, but our podcast, More Than Mammies, it's a business. And we started it, of course, to talk about maternity, not to become an e-commerce expert.
So yeah, we needed some help selling our merch and getting our store up and running. Woohoo! Another sale!
Shopify is a commerce platform revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide.
No matter if you are a garage entrepreneur or a big business, Shopify is the only tool you need to start and grow your business without the struggle.
With Shopify's single dashboard, you can manage orders, shipping, and payments from anywhere, giving you the insights you need wherever you are. Sign up for $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/sonoro, all lowercase.
Go to shopify.com/sonoro to take your business to the next level today.
Shopify.com/sonoro.
Those groups, too, in the 40s, in the 50s, were spearheading anti-Black efforts. They learned how to say the N-word as a way to show other white people, hey, we're just like you. We don't like them either.
Welcome to another episode of the Brown and Black Podcast. My name is Jack Rico.
And I'm Mike Sargent.
And every week we take a look at race and pop culture through a brown and black lens. All right, everybody, prepare yourself for this episode. Mike, you got your fire extinguisher, right? We're bringing some fire today.
That's for sure.
We're tackling today a very uncomfortable question for a lot of Latinos to discuss, okay? And the question is this: are Latinos the new whites? And what role does politics play in that? What are the factors that will make a Latino aspire to whiteness instead of holding on and preserving to their own Latino identity? And these are the questions today, Mike, that we're going to explore.
Today we're speaking with Efren Perez. He's a professor of political science and psychology at UCLA, and he holds a Ph.D. from Duke University and focuses his research on race, ethnicity, politics, and society. But he recently wrote a very provocative article in Newsweek. Title of the article is "Why the Politics of Republican Latinos Suggests They Want to Be White." In it, he argues that some Latinos' whiteness is not about race, but about ideology, a white ideology that places power, privilege, and dominance above all else.
Efren, as Latinos that we are, there are some things we're not supposed to talk about. And we're not supposed to talk about the shit that makes us Latinos, that dark stuff that we have inside of ourselves. The stuff that you're opening up like a can of worms, like a Pandora's box on Newsweek. So I was like, all right, I got to check this article out, because Mike and I have dedicated basically 3 years on the illusion that there is this sense that Latinos really want to be white, but don't say anything. Don't say anything, because we're supposed to play the brown card. And Mike and I have already showed moments in pop culture history where this has happened, where Latinos change their names in Hollywood, where they conceal their heritage for an audition for Michael Bay. For John Leguizamo, I can't get that much sun because I need to keep my whiteness. The article that I'm talking about is the Newsweek article called "Why the Politics of Republican Latinos Suggests They Want to Be White." In it, you argue that some Latinos are attracted not to the idea of becoming white, like Sammy Sosa from the Dominican Republic who bleached his skin. You don't bleach your skin. You bleach your mindset. And you argue that some Latinos are attracted to the idea of whiteness as an ideology that demands hierarchy and domination. Can you expand on what you mean by whiteness as an ideology as opposed to the conventional wisdom of race?
Thanks again for having me on. I'm a political psychologist by training, right? So I study what professional nerds call intergroup relations, right? How white people and various peoples of color do and don't get along in various settings, but in the US in particular. I had been reading a lot of articles highlighting this support for Trump, which is small, but real. They don't want to be Latino as it's commonly construed, which, if I had to boil it down, means that you're unapologetic about your heritage. Your political interests and aspirations look like those more of African Americans, and so do your life chances. That's actually what Latino Republicans are reacting to. And you only get two options in politics. You get Democrats or Republicans, and Republicans are the party that basically says, you see black people out there? They're actually the tip of the iceberg. It's related to all this other stuff that you don't like. Transgender politics, feminism, anything that smacks left of center. And so when I'm saying that they want to be white in an ideological sense, what I'm saying is they are subscribing to the idea of being a part of this organized group that is saying, not only should we be keeping these kinds of individuals out of mainstream life, marginalized, subordinated, I want to help you do that. I want to enforce that inequality. And where does this come from? At a more fundamental level, really what we're talking about are personality differences in some ways. We all vary on a lot of dimensions, and two of the dimensions that matter here are, what is your preference for relationships with groups in general? And some people want more inequality between groups. They think there should be better groups, lesser groups. And then there's people on the opposite end of that same personality difference that says, no, we should have more equality between these groups. That's called social dominance orientation. That individual difference, the more you have of this, the more you want to enforce inequality in society. These are the enforcers to a drug cartel. They're the ones saying, this is how we're going to run things. You belong in the bottom. I belong in the top.
This is status, though.
It is. And then the other difference is what we call authoritarianism. It's not a pretty name, but it really boils down to a preference for uniformity. You like things to generally be the same, and conformity. You want everyone to generally be alike. Personality doesn't know hemispheric differences. It doesn't know if you're Latino or not, if you're white or not. And what's happened in the last sort of 7 years, beginning with Donald Trump, these personality differences were just laying in the dark, waiting to be activated. And what the former president did is he organized the entire party around themes that have to do with hierarchy and with homogeneity. And so he was basically throwing wet spaghetti at a wall, and it clicked with the core of white Republicans, but it also clicked with a non-trivial share of people of color, Latinos specifically. And the thing that's amazing is if you talk to people, they'll tell you things like, oh, I don't think it's right for gays and lesbians to get married. I don't think transgender people belong in public, but they will not say that makes me a bad person. And all I was trying to do with that article was say, look, the reason that the Republican brand is so attractive to these non-white individuals is that they share in that ideological view that there are better people, more deserving people, and lesser people, less deserving people. We used to call this values. We used to say, oh, no. I'm not anti-gay. It's just I'm highly religious. And I'm here, and I'm here to tell you it's deeper than that. It's deeper than that. Religion is just a rationalization. It's a way that we make ourselves not feel bad for having those kinds of opinions, because psychologically that's distressing. The main point is we all know that the category white has expanded and narrowed across the centuries, and we are living in a moment awash in data where we can show you it's going through some expansion right now. I mean, in the past, like 125 years ago, we used to think of Jews and Italians as basically like another minoritized group, and now they are white. So it's not their skin color. I don't know what the focus is on, like, well, they're from Western European and so they're a little bit lighter. No. Those groups too, in the 40s, in the 50s, were spearheading anti-Black efforts. They learned how to say the N-word as a way to show other white people, hey, we're just like you. We don't like them either. And so it is happening again. And I just wish that there was more attention to sort of the gravity of the moment, especially for the Latino community, because I think one of the big things coming down the pike here is once the immigrants are here, what happens to their children and grandchildren, right? Are they going to say, you know what, as much as things are better for me here than in the homeland, my general quality of life looks much more similar to Black people and others? Or are you going to say, I can acknowledge that's my social position, but I want something better. And in order for me to get something better, I got to distance myself from these other groups. And that's sort of one of the big questions in terms of assimilation is which direction are you and your kids going to go through? And that was it. I got frustrated with what I was reading. And I thought, okay, I'm going to put out this test balloon and then now collect additional data, run more studies. But the point is very simple. This is about power. This is about your position in society. And this is really about, do you want to continue to be a minoritized community or not? And I'm of the mind, as you could probably tell from the flag behind me, that you can do both. You can stay true to your heritage, pluses and minuses, but you can also play politics that is more, I don't know, for lack of a better word, more inclusive.
A lot of your article was really focused on Latino Republicans. We had John Leguizamo on the podcast, and when we asked him about Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, can you please explain Hispanics for Trump for me? Can you please explain Ted Cruz?
That's like Roach's
Rubio?
Parade. That's all I can tell you. I find Latin Republicans for Trump disgusting. I mean, I don't mind Latin Republicans, but for Trump,
these two Latinos, that the last thing they represent in their body language, in their language, is Latino. So I'm going,
right,
stop playing the Cruz card for Latino groups. Stop trying to speak Spanish like you care, like you speak it at home. You're not a real Latino, right? But what the hell is like a real Latino today? I think we're redefining that. You're asking us to redefine race as well. But what about Latino Democrats? I have a feeling, Efren, that article should have also included them, because there's a majority silent bunch that also wants to be white.
So, I actually do have a little bit to say on that. And that part, that is an actual line of work in my research lab at UCLA, which is under what conditions do Latinos in particular feel motivated to express anti-Black prejudice, anti-Black hostility?
Nuri Martinez.
Exactly. And the way that this happens is Latinos as a immigrant origin population, right? One of the attractions to being in the US is buying into being an American, the American dream. You get mobility, you get stability. And what we found and what we argue is that Latinos lay a claim to being American, and this includes Republicans and Democrats. But that claim is very tenuous. They're actually positioned on the edges of what it means to be American because they don't fully have white skin. Their command of English might not be great. And or look, they're just not white, period, in a traditional sense. And so what we know from psychology is that people who are members of a group, but who are stationed along the edges of that group, they are very sensitive to sharpening that line between the group they belong to and the group that they are being contrasted against. And so we ran a couple of experiments where we basically assigned people on a random basis to read about turtles, to read an article about how Latinos are becoming more American because they're buying homes, cars, consumer goods, and then a third article where they're actually becoming less American because of unemployment, wage inequalities, and that is making them closer in status to African Americans. And this is about 4 studies that we ran. And what we found consistently is that relative to reading about those turtles, if you read about Latinos declining in status of becoming more like Black people, after they read that, they express more racism toward Blacks, and that racism makes them more opposed to policies that would benefit African Americans, but in principle would also benefit Latinos, right? So psychologically, what's happening here is Latinos have this very tenuous position in this American category, and this includes Republicans, Democrats, and if you just rattle that cage and you undermine that very marginal position in that category American, that's enough to motivate anti-Black attitudes among this population, for sure. To your point, the effect is strongest actually among left of center Latinos. So the people who you would least expect to actually express these kinds of things are not only more sensitive to their position to be an American, but they're also the most likely to respond with the kinds of attitudes that I just described.
Part of what you're saying reminds me of something we've discussed here in the show, which is Pablo Freire's The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, where you want to be at the top. You want to be like what's put you down. You're saying certain ideologies appeal to personalities just on a species level. But how much of that has to do specifically with what you've experienced as a culture or where you've been positioned socially in a culture?
It's tricky because to unpack cultural influence, we have to be more specific than just this sort of broad umbrella.
Right. Well, when I say culture, I mean the society specifically.
Yeah.
The
so
society
for a lot of Latinos, essentially, they've left some of that culture, and there's traces of it from their homelands that get repackaged and get reactivated as part of the sort of anti-Black agenda that we have here in the United States. It's that simple. The fragments are there, and then you come to the US and you have only 2 parties. And one of them is telling you very explicitly, this is very well documented. This is not me making stuff up. This is in the last 50 years or so. The Republican Party has essentially made race and Black people in particular their organizing point. And so for some Latinos, not the majority, but a non-trivial minority, that is very attractive because of what you said, which is I get a little bit more status, right? Just a little. In the end, in intergroup relations, it's not whether you're absolutely better off, it's whether you're relatively better off, even by a little bit, than whoever that outgroup out there is. This is sort of the theme in a lot of historical books about the wages of whiteness, which is you can be poor and white, but if you're not Black, that's enough to keep you happy. I guess what I'm saying is history is repeating itself, It's a new cast of characters.
Yep.
The cast of characters in this day and age is Latino. And my main urging as a social scientist is, unlike previous times, we actually have really high quality data to get a handle on this stuff, to figure out why it happens, and then to figure out how you weaken it or try to eliminate it as much as possible.
Are you saying that whiteness and anti-blackness are synonyms?
No, they're not synonyms. If you think about race relations in the US, but this is any society that is racially diverse, we have these various groups, both white and non-white, that are arranged pretty neatly in people's minds in a very clear pecking order or hierarchy. And that pecking order has two poles or positions. One of them, which is the one that gets a lot of airtime, is the white supremacy pole. So this is the acknowledgement that white people, on average, have more status, more power, more mobility, more privilege than Black, Latino, Asian, any other group. But the other pole that matters here is the anti-Black pole. And this is why a lot of what you're interested in and what I'm interested in matters so much. Yes, Latinos and other minorities, some of them are attracted by wanting to lay claim to being white, however tenuous that grip is. But they're also highly motivated and pushed in that direction by a motivation to not be Black or be confused with Black. And so what I want to highlight here is that's not the majority, but it is a non-trivial minority. We can identify people. We know them. We see them. We interact with them.
It's growing.
Well, it's definitely growing.
At an alarming rate. I just read the New York Times just 6 days ago. Trump's support amongst Latinos grows. 15% is the electorate. 46% right now, the polls, are voting for Trump. We're getting closer to having more than half of the population vote Republican, which is a hint of what America's going to look like in 20, 30 years in the next generation. What are the long-term consequences for Latino identity if more Latinos adopt a whiteness ideology?
I'll say two things. So the first thing is that in terms of the breakdown for Latinos and their partisan allegiance, the figure has been for the last 40 or so years where we have high quality data. When I say high quality data, data that allows you to say with some narrow margin of error what a given statistic is. And in this case, 2 out of 3 Latinos for the last 40 years are actually self-identified Democrats. That means that 1/3, when I keep on referring to this non-trivial minority, 1/3 has been and continues to be Republican. So what is going to be disappointing in what I say is that those dynamics change very slowly. And it's not a Latino thing. This is just the way partisanship works. Partisanship, your partisan identity, whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, once you pick it up, once you develop it, it's very sticky. It's very hard to change. So just think of it as a slow moving average over time. But what this means for your question about Latino identity is that the Latino population more generally has gotten so large now that diversity is actually now coming back to haunt us, because internally we're having personal debates, public debates, private debates about what it means to be Latino. And right now, those 2/3 that I referred to have the upper hand in the sense that they define themselves not only as Democrats, but because you're a Democrat, you adopt attitudes, policy positions that are considered racially liberal, left of center, pro-Black, pro-Latino, etc. But then there's that 1/3 that is, I would agree, investing way more now than they used to in providing an alternative way of what it means to be Latino. If you're that other kind of Latino, you don't see racism. You don't see race. What racism? If you're not making it, you're not working hard. That's the problem. And again, part of why there's so much clarity in this is not that I'm some sort of whiz. It's that we only have two parties. And those are the two visions that are on tap for us. And so going forward, I don't expect massive fluctuations that are visible to the naked eye over time, but I am seeing more internal effervescence, more bubbling over this exact set of questions. Think of it as your podcast and this theme that we're treating. That's sort of what is going to be in play and changing and rechanging in the next coming set of years for Latinos. Who are we and where do we want to position ourselves, not only with respect to the parties, but with respect to these other racial groups that are not Latino?
Yeah, what's going to be our narrative moving forward?
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
and, and it's happened before. I hope your listeners understand that it wasn't the case that Latinos and Mexicans in particular were left of center, racially liberal. I mean, in the 50s, when they came back from fighting World War II, they were bending over backwards to try to get white mainstream individuals to at least acknowledge that they weren't white. They weren't exactly like Black people. And all of that changed in the aftermath of the civil rights movement. When these folks, when a lot of other people in the Mexican American community in particular saw the level of organization and gains that came from organizing along racial lines with the left of center sort of emphasis, this is where you end up getting the push to develop the category Latino, to put it on the US Census, and to make the community basically be or transform it into a left of center, relatively progressive voting bloc. It's like one of the marvels of modern history that doesn't get airtime, how a largely socially conservative, very Catholic population gets transformed into one of the main linchpins to the Democratic Party. I mean, it's crazy, right? I went to Catholic school my whole life. My kids go to Catholic school, but our politics are essentially racially liberal, left of center. We're a strongly Democratic household. And that is in spite of all the baggage that my parents brought here. And my parents are actually Democrats as well. This is what we're talking about, like exactly like you said. Not only how do we want to define ourselves in the coming years, but who gets to call the shots in that regard?
Jack and I have talked about this as well, that the conversation about race in America is generally binary. It's black and white. And so if you're going to pick a side and you have a choice, clearly you're going to pick the dominant side. I can see all that, but I just want to know what your thoughts are, again, whether it's from a species level or, as you said, an ideology that transcends skin color. But what's your take on someone like any number of Black Republicans, like this North Carolina Lieutenant Governor, Mark Robinson, who is clearly his ideology and he uses religion, like you said, to justify his bias. But there's a Republican down in Florida who is really behind getting rid of Black history from colleges and dismantling DEI. As a Black person, it's easy to see how a Latino could make that choice. Because one of the other things you said in your article is that being called a race traitor or a quisling, as I like to call them, means nothing to someone who's not equipped. Let's just say the majority of their race is not perceived, does not have the social status that they'd like. Because a lot of Latinos and a lot of Blacks too want to distance themselves from, I'm not that kind of Black, or I'm not that kind of Latino. I'm not one of them.
What I would say is it's a very similar dynamic, but more muted. The similar dynamic is also that, as much as people don't like to admit, there is enormous internal heterogeneity politically among all communities of color, but the Black community in particular. This is a theme that from slavery on, there's been some very sharp, pointed differences of opinion in terms of how do we move our community forward. And for a small but very vocal share of Black people, there are some, like Tim Scott and others, who also think, you know what, I don't want to be Black like that. And really what it boils down to is I don't want to be Black in the bleeding heart liberal sense, right? There's got to be a different path, right? And the path is either Blackness means something different, or we soft pedal Blackness and we play up our other non-racial identities. Now, why would someone like Tim Scott and others do this? Well, they have a very strong instrumental motive, right? They are a tiny fraction of the Republican Party. They also want to win office. They also want to climb up the ranks. And so if you're in a party where talking about race and being basically sympathetic to these causes is the opposite of what your party stands for, you adjust your attitudes to fit your partisan identity. Now, the other part I wanted to say is, why does it feel more muted among Black Americans, especially in comparison to Latino? You mentioned, I could totally see why some Latinos do this. I have a harder time thinking why or what compels Black people to do this. And the reason that you have a difficult time, and that a lot of people have a difficult time imagining why Black people would have this turn toward Republicanism, is that unlike Latinos, unlike Asian Americans, Black people as a community, as a group, have incredibly strong social norms that they enforce among their members. And so what that means is you can have a difference of opinion. You want to be more conservative? You're welcome to be more conservative, but you're going to get shunned. You're going to be ridiculed. You're going to be ousted. And that's why Tim Scott is hanging around with Donald Trump and not around other fellow Republicans in droves. That social sanctioning is incredibly strong. It's actually part of why 9 out of 10 Black Americans are Democrats, right? The fact that they're Democrats doesn't mean they don't have differences of opinion. It means that they've decided collectively as a group that, look, we're going to cast our lot with this party. It might not be the best, it might not be optimal, but it's certainly better than the Republican alternative. This work is by 2 Black political scientists, one who's at Princeton now, Ishmael White, and Cheryl Laird, who's at the University of Maryland. And they've done an extensive amount of work just to show how social sanctioning works to keep basically Black Republicanism at bay.
Wow. Well, what I was going to say was, then does this apply to the Afro-Latino then, who's also Black? And then what do you say about the Dominican? The Dominican looks to the left and he sees Haitians. He sees Black. And then he looks to the right and he looks to his Spaniard conquistador man in a horse, in a uniform, from Europe, white. Now the Spaniards are leaving. We're leaving the Dominican Republic. We're going to leave you alone. And they have to decide at that moment whether they want to be Black or whether they want to be white or whether they want to be them. And so when you ask a Dominican, they're like, yeah, I'm Dominican. They don't accept their Blackness. So is that anti-Black? How does that play into Latino identity? Do they think they're white?
All Latinos, all groups, but I'm going to focus on Latinos. All Latinos are nothing more than a collection of various attributes. And socially and politically, we've decided that what gets to define who Latinos are is someone like me. Second generation, that is, my parents came to the US, Mexican American, because we're the majority, we're the plurality of the community, and US born. So for a lot of Afro-Latinos, part of the reaction is, I know I'm Latino. I know I'm from Latin America. I can lay claim to that. But I also understand cognitively and psychologically that what it means to be Latino in the US is essentially Mexican American. Their alternative is there somewhere else for some of those individuals who don't want to feel isolated, disconnected to the Latino community as defined? There is arguably the Black community for them, right? Under some circumstances, they probably cast their lot with them. But when the discussions turn to or shine the light on internal dynamics, that's where you get a lot of seemingly Black people being anti-Black. And it shouldn't be a paradox because it all depends on who you're comparing yourself to. If you are in a set of groups, even within the Latino community, and your comparison point is Mexicans, it's probably more likely that you're going to cast your lot with another group that's not that. But in discussions where they're political, where there's only two alternatives party-wise, then that might look more like, I think I'm going to go the way of the Republicans, because at least Republicans don't talk about Latinos in the way that I have a distaste for. So this goes back to this issue of heterogeneity or diversity internal to the Latino community. And through accidents of history and politics, right now in the US, that's how Latino gets defined in general. I'm not saying I agree with it, but demographically and in terms of available data, that's a reality. And that's why people have a strong reaction to it. This is why you can get Latinos to be anti-immigration in a sense, because they'll say, oh, yeah, I'm not Central American, or in previous years, I'm not Mexican, because all of a sudden your point of comparison is this other Latin American group.
My last question to you, Efren, is this. Towards the end of the article, you suggest that there's a shaming that goes on, that public shaming of these traitors, these Latino Republican traitors.
Quislings. Quislings, that's right.
That won't work. That's not gonna cut it, because they don't see Latinos as a group that's facing discrimination. And that's the part that I was like, what? So do you feel that, that these people truly don't see that we're struggling, underrepresented, that they ignore all the data, and that if we shame them publicly on social media, you shouldn't do that, you should speak some Spanish, you should be more Latino, stop being so damn white passing, that's not going to work. So if that's not going to work, what is going to work?
Yeah, that's a great question. The reason that it won't work, and what I couldn't get into in the essay, is that criticism is falling on deaf ears. It might make them feel socially awkward, but it's not going to undermine, and in fact is going to validate what they already think about their co-ethnics, which is, oh man, you guys have it all wrong. The reason that your life chances are still miserably low relative to other people is because you're yapping about all your struggles, you're playing the victim card, and you just need to work hard. That's their frame of mind. And yes, to your point, do they believe this? I've asked myself this question too. They do believe it. The same way that we believe things aren't so rosy for the Latino community in general. So what does work for them? Quit focusing on the outliers, visible as they may be, tempting as it may be, and focus your energy on organizing, mobilizing the 2/3 that is already convinced, but doesn't have the time to vote, doesn't have the time or resources to make their perspective felt. Do you see what I mean? Like, I think we lose out in some ways to these characters who are numerous, but they're not the majority because they're on TV. They're pushing that message.
They're more committed. They're
Yeah.
more committed
Yeah,
to their
yes.
ideology
And
than the
imagine if
majority
the
is.
minority
And
Latinos were as committed as these characters.
It's just being organized. It's just getting your
And we lack
message
that.
out there.
We lack that.
Building on what you're saying and what Jack asked you, the name of the show is Brown and Black. And I'll be honest, until I started doing this show with Jack, I grew up in New York. So when I think Latino, I think Puerto Rican.
Right.
I don't necessarily think, if I were in Florida, I'd probably think something else, Colombian. If I lived in LA, I'd think Mexican. But to me, some of my best friends are Puerto Rican. I live in a mostly Dominican neighborhood. In many ways, like I did not realize there was this amount of animosity within the Latino community towards Black people. That was eye-opening for me. But my question is, yeah, we do need to have unity. We do need to unify. We do need to come together. And because I also think it's human nature to not want to have to think. What are your thoughts on education or knowing your history and the impact of that? The generation that doesn't want to think because AI is coming and we're going to have to think less, and then brown-black unity.
Okay, so man, you saved the meaty part for close to the end, but I'll try to be brief because this gets to the core of what I do.
Take your time. Take your time.
So I'm a political psychologist, right? So I'm a social scientist, and I think one of the things education-wise that I do as a professor at UCLA is to teach younger people how to really scrutinize the kind of information that comes their way. What I see in a lot of young people is just passing acceptance because a professor said it, some social media personality said it, a sports person said it, someone on the news said it. And I'm not saying that they have to be skeptical for the sake of being skeptical or being like a pain in the ass. What I'm saying is they can learn how to and be taught how to evaluate the quality of claims. Right? Is this something that just sounds true? Or is this something that is extensively supported by systematic studies, historical analyses, et cetera, et cetera?
We're too gullible.
And you'd be surprised. Students are willing to sort of learn that if you show them the value outside of the classroom for something like that, right? But I'm also a big proponent in a very funny sense, like just read, please read, just like read extensively. Read history, even from the other perspective. Like I've read biographies of the founder of the Birch Society, which was this like right of center organization in the 60s, super conspiracy theory minded. Now, in terms of unity, we've been talking about Latinos and African Americans and other groups as if they sort of naturally belong together. They don't. There's nothing natural about Black people, Latino people, Asian people, Middle Eastern people having similar political preferences. But what we do know is that there is one common denominator to all of these non-white communities, and that is we are systematically marginalized. And so what we have found in our lab is that when you remind individuals, let's say Black people, and you remind them that Latinos are facing discrimination that is eerily similar to what some of them experience, they do two things. They express more solidarity with people of color, broadly construed, and that solidarity steers them to support policies that don't necessarily benefit their group, but benefit people of color in general. So when Black people read about Latino discrimination, they express more solidarity. And on the basis of that solidarity, they become more pro-Latino. Latinos do the same thing. When they read about shared discrimination with African Americans, same solidarity mechanism, they become more pro-Black. Asian Americans do this, and so do Middle Easterners and North Africans. The point that I want to highlight here is that there is nothing natural that unites us, that it involves a lot of work in developing narratives that resonate with a broad cross-section of non-white people. Yes, it wasn't slavery for both groups, but essentially blacks were leaving Jim Crow and Mexicans were leaving being peasants in the countryside. I was like, why don't you guys talk about this? It's not the same thing, but it is similar. And it just has to resonate. It doesn't have to be 100% wrinkle-free. It just needs to, people need to say, hey, you're right. You're right. Soul food is like Mexican food in the sense that you use every part of the goddamn animal, right? It's that kind of stuff.
Well, listen, we're going to vote for you when you run.
Yeah.
You run on that platform, and we're with it.
Why the politics of Republican Latinos suggests they want to be white. You can read it right now on Newsweek. Efren, once again, man, thank you very much for being on the show and enlightening us.
You bet.
And that's it for this episode of Brown and Black. We'd like to thank Efren Perez for being on the podcast. And if you would like to support this podcast, please subscribe and leave a review. Your help will allow us to be heard by many more people. You can follow our comments and opinions on @BrownBlackPodcast on Instagram, Threads, and YouTube. We'll see you on the next episode
Of Brown and Black.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
VGW Group. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.